Welcome to the American Can Story. My name is Bob Gallagher. I will be your host and narrator for this program, which was produced by the Norfolk Visual Archives, a New Horizon project for senior citizens, affiliated with the Eva Brooke Donnelly Museum of Simcoe. We were ably assisted by Clearview Cable personnel and facilities. The American Can was a large international manufacturer of metal and paper containers with headquarters in New York City and Greenwich, Connecticut. I had the privilege of working for this company for 43 years. The first 20 were spent in the Hamilton, Chatham, and Portland, Maine plants, and the last 23 at the Simcoe operation. It is this Simcoe plant that the American Can Story is all about. It began in 1929 when the powers that be closed the Niagara Falls can-making facilities to build a plant in Simcoe, where Canadian Canners, one of the largest food processors in Ontario, was located. Over the next 62 years, its contribution to the social and economic development of the community was enormous, and for over half a century, it was the single largest employer in town. Its demise came in 1991 when Ball Packaging of Muncie, Indiana, bought the entire Canadian operation and decided to close Simcoe for economic reasons. In this presentation, then, through the use of videos, photographs, and various interviews, we will trace the history of the can company from its beginning in the Great Depression of 1929 through World War II and the post-war period to the advent of labor unions. We will review the community impact, our 75th anniversary, open house, plant tours, plant management, and finally its demise in 1991. Now let us go back to 1929 when the plant was under construction. We are indeed fortunate to have with us two men, Ed Whitehead and Biff Cody, who were among the first employees to be hired. Our guest this morning is Ed Whitehead, and Ed joined the company in 1930 and retired in 1963. And it's a pleasure to have you with us this morning, Ed, and welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Ed, I wonder if you would give us a look at your career over the years with the American Can.
Yeah, well, I started the second day of January, 1930. And the building wasn't finished. They didn't have the blocks on the floor. They didn't have the windows in. And then they pulled some machine shop equipment in there. And they used the braziers with the coking, and you had one behind you when you were working.
That was the heating system, was it?
But, yeah, that was it. But things moved very fast. And they started to move in the equipment, a few lines, and the rest of the machine shop. And they gradually got going. You really forget just what did happen in those days.
We were right at Simcoe when they started digging out the ground and stuff.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, of course, we worked like at the back end of the Canadian Canners, and that was across the road was the school, the central school. And the first thing we knew, actually, you'd be sitting outside the plant and the trees would be falling down. And that was it. You knew it was for real.
And then they bulldozed down the school?
No, they pulled it down carefully because they used part of it after Canadian Canners was built. After American Can was built, part of the school wasn't destroyed. And we worked in there during the time they were finishing the American Can building.
Oh, yeah.
And then it was gradually taken down. See?
And there used to be a lithograph plant on the site, I understand.
Yeah, that was before my time, though. But it was a very good thing for Simcoe because they were fairly high-paid men. It was a high-paid industry.
Did you see them build that smokestack yet?
Well, I didn't actually watch it being built.
That must have been quite
I tell you, we were too busy at the American Can to watch too many things because you work day and night.
Yeah.
7 days a week. The wages, I remember the plant manager, Frank Cardiff, he was the plant manager of the Canadian Canners plant, and he was moved over. But before he was moved over, he came to me and he said, I've raised your wages to 45 cents an hour. And so that the American can would possibly follow suit, which they did. They paid the same wages, you see. So I was getting 45 cents an hour then. That was good money, you know.
That was, you were a skilled tradesman, though.
Yes.
Ed.
Yeah, but...
I was talking to Biff Cody earlier. Biff was saying he came up from Niagara Falls for 27.5 cents.
Yes,
well, you're getting about 17.5 cents an hour more.
Well, the going rate in Simcoe could have been anywhere. You were saying 15 cents, 20 cents, 25 cents.
Yeah.
So 30 cents.
Guest this morning is Biff Cody. And Biff came to us from Niagara Falls in February of he started in February of 1926 at the Falls, and he came up to Simcoe when the can plant was built in 1930. Biff, what were the major changes that you can think of in the American can? Like when it started off, there must have been low production speeds and so forth. Did you...
You mean at the beginning of my career?
Yeah, when you started back in the 30s. How fast were they running, say, the sanitary lines against what they were when you left?
They were only... Some of the lines were only making 6,000, 7,000 cans an hour.
On the sanitaries?
Yes. And
when you left, they were running probably 30,000.
Yes, they were running 25 to 30,000 cans every hour. And
so for the canners, you were making what, the 211-400, the 10 ounce, going through the wall?
They made dozens of sizes.
What was the big volume item?
Mostly the soup cans, the 10 ounce cans.
And when did you pick up the Campbell Soup contract, Biff? You know?
No, not exactly.
That must have added an awful lot of people to the plant, though.
Well, it made, the lines operated a lot longer. In other words, instead of working 8 hours, it'd be 2 10-hour shifts.
Yeah. How many shifts did you have in 1930, Biff? Was it just a day shift?
Yeah, like in the fall of the year when the peaches and pears and things like that were on, they'd probably have an extra shift on.
Ah. Was Niagara Falls plant on 3 shifts or 1 shift?
No, the only shift they worked down there, it started at 7 in the morning, and if they had to get an order out, they kept on running till 9 and 10 o'clock at night.
So the business up from the Falls was sanitary business. Then when we went into the double tights and the general line type of can, must have been after Simcoe was built.
Yeah, that's right.
So
they took a lot of that business from some of the other plants like Hamilton and Montreal.
Yeah, so you'd have been in Simcoe plant during the recession years too, wouldn't you? Just in
the 30s,
early 30s.
Oh yeah.
Did it impact Simcoe very much?
Gee, I mean, we got a recession now, but the recession in the 30s was terrible. I mean, I was still on hourly rate, and there's a lot of days that, when you're getting, I think by that time I was making 30-some cents an hour, and by that, a lot of days you only work, or a lot of weeks, you only work 2 days a week, because things were so rough.
Okay, so that's what I was going to get at. If they cut your work week back, did they cut your pay at all, Biff?
No, they never cut the pay. That was one good thing about the company. They never cut our pay. But they cut our hours, though. There'd be lots of days. It'd have 3 or 4 days at home during the week.
Boy, that'd be pretty hard on the family, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So, but everybody got along because a lot of people had gardens of their own, and and went out and worked in the orchards or anything like that. Everybody worked those days. They took any job, so they could keep on living till they got back in their own job.
And even back in 1939, war in Europe ended the Great Depression. 72 of our young men and women left their jobs to enlist in the armed services, and the remainder stayed behind to begin the production of shell casings for the Army. After hostilities ended, 52 were to return to Canco to resume their careers, and 19 went on to other endeavors. Only one, Robert Aitken, made the supreme sacrifice for king and country. Now let us talk to the 3 Bentley brothers and Biff Cody to find out what it was like at the can plant in those days. With me today are 3 gentlemen with long-term service, the Bentley brothers. On my extreme right is George, better known as Chirp. Gordon, and Jim. Each of these gentlemen have 46 years service with the American Can, total of 138 years. And I'm sure that has to be a record in the annals of the American Can's history. During the war, Chirp, was there much war production going on at the American Can?
I was only there for 39, 40, 41, and 42. I went in the service. So I guess after that it became more predominant than the early part of the war.
Gord, do you remember anything about the war production?
In the machine shop, they made 50 millimeter or caliber machine gun bullets plus 303 rifle shell casings for the armed services. Yeah.
I think the casings came in from the munitions plant, and we had a row of girls, ladies, filing all of these shell casings for years at the American Can, and I guess that we must have had 20 or 30 of them there, all sitting in a row, and the guys that deliver these containers of these shells, casings, and the girls would take them and set them out and file them all off with hand files. It was done with hand files, and then they'd get them to the right size, and then they'd repack them and ship them back out. But that went on for, I'd say, about 3 or 4 years during the war, the latter part of the war.
Well, Chirp was the only one who actually served in the war.
Yes, he was.
You were too young, Gordon?
I was too young, yeah, by
And
about a
you
year
were
and
in
a
a
half.
sort of a reserve outfit, were you, Jimmy?
No, I was too young when the war was on, but I just was in the peacetime Air Force in '52.
Mm-hmm. When you came back from the war, Chirp, was there ever a problem? The government guaranteed you could have the same job when you got back.
Uh-huh.
But was there any problem with other people being laid off? Was there any special adjustments you had to make?
No, I don't recall that.
But when the war was on, like, the women moved into the heavy slugging jobs. Women became body maker operators, and they fed those body makers
Can pilers?
just as good as any man.
You were there over the war years then, Biff,
In Simcoe Plant.
in Simcoe Plant,
Yes.
39 through 45. Was there quite an outflow of young people at that time, young men and women going off to war, and
Well,
a lot of hiring?
Quite a few of our people went off to serve overseas. So I'd say at least 15% or more were women who were hired to take their places and do the jobs while they were overseas. And some of them were still kept on when they come back.
Yeah, I think the government in those days promised that if you came back, you'd have the same
Yes,
job as
that's
when
right.
you left.
That's
Was there
right.
any resentment in the plant, Biff, people coming back and being bumped off the jobs?
No, because at that time there was a lot of jobs, and of course the plant expanded and kept putting more lines in, so there was no problem that I know of that the fellows couldn't get their job back.
In today's living, we take so much for granted. Example, the old tin can that for generations has preserved our foods and other products. Open them up, throw them away. Now, better still, recycle them. About 75 billion cans a year in North America. What would life be without the old tin can? Have we ever stopped to appreciate the importance of this marvelous container? Simcoe Plant was built primarily to manufacture food containers. Over the years, production evolved into paint, motor oil, pet food, and sundry other products, packed in cans of all shapes and sizes. We manufactured frozen juice containers from paper and even installed the two-piece line to produce pet food cans. Manufacturing a tin can is a very complex operation. We've asked Gord Pangborn, Manager of Engineering, to take us through a step-by-step analysis of how this is accomplished. In addition, we will see the gallon paint can trim presses in operation. Gord, I've had some people ask about how a can is made. Like this video will be viewed by people who know what how the cans are made, but there will also be people out there who are completely unfamiliar with it. Would you be good enough to take the 401, 411 can there and go through the manufacture for us?
Well, this is the finished can. I'll just go through step by step.
Sure, please.
We would bring sheets of tin plate in from our Hamilton plant, cut to the size that we required to get so many bodies out of the sheet of plate. That would be put in the start of the can line, which is a Dexter feed, and these sheets would be automatically fed into a slitter where the size of the body, the length and the width of it would be cut. This is then fed into a body maker, and again, everything is automatic. Each sheet is taken into the body maker. The notches are cut. That's the first station in there, and the notches are strictly to get an overlap at the seam, so you don't have 4 thicknesses of plate or too much tin plate, so you can handle it.
When you see them on the bottom.
Yeah. It goes from there into the roll form. Now, the roll form either makes the can plain, or as you see on this one, it will bead the can. You can change your tools to make it one way or the other. From there, it goes on what we call a carrier cylinder, which is just basically wrapping this body around a round cylinder and moving it through stations to the edger station. The edger station forms what we call hooks on the can. From there, the can receives flux, so we can solder at that point. Then it goes into the bumping station, and the hooks are bent like that. They're put together, and then they're hammered so they're flat. And that's where you see the line down the can on a soldered can. From there, they went over the solder bath, which is just a 52-inch long roll in a bath of molten solder, forcing solder into that seam to make a seal, and it's a hermetic seal. From there, excess solder is wiped off in the wiping station, and that solder can be reused again. It's just a means of making a more attractive package and saving money on it. From there, you went into through a series of elevators, can turners. There's a lot of little machinery in there, but into the flanger, and you formed a flange, and that is the flange at the top where it is rolled over, the same thing on the bottom. From the flanger, it went into what we called our double seamers. That would assemble the end onto the body of the can.
And those ends came up from Hamilton, Gordon. We didn't make them. In a lot of cases.
Originally, we made them in Simcoe. We had all our own end-making equipment. The company started up a new plant in Hamilton. They called it the Central End, and they made all the ends for Canada. So in the last years, I believe it was around 1960, they started shipping the ends into Simcoe. These ends were applied to the can, a hermetic seal made on the can. The can would then flow up to what we call an automatic air tester. Each can that was made was tested. There was air put in the can sealed. If any air leaked out of the can was automatically rejected.
Would it be retested, Gordon?
They would be retested in a water tester, and this was done manually, not automatically. From there, we would send the can down through a series of conveyors, cableway conveyors, runways, gravity drops, into our palletizers in the later stages that we had gone to palletized units. From there, it would go automatically, be palletized with an operator there, go automatically onto a conveyor system that would take the cans, the pallets down. It would divide them to whether they're going to be wrapped with a cardboard shroud, steel strapping or plastic strapping, and then tiered into 2 high, so the truck driver only had to make one trip to pick up a load for the trucks.
2 pallets and the 1 load.
Yeah.
Gord, the inside enamel on the can there, that was put on by Hamilton, true?
The inside enamel was put on by Hamilton, but we also had the means of spraying a coat of enamel on the cans after it was made. And that was just for double protection or for cans with hard-to-hold products, like apple juice was a hard-to-hold product.
Gord, you mentioned at the body maker you had a roll form body maker. There also was the other type, wing type body maker. Would you explain the difference between the two?
Well, the roll form, your cans were fed automatically cross into a roll that would curl the can into the size of the body, and that would go on the cylinder. The wing form was an original body maker, and they dated right back to about 1900. They were developed. And the body just traveled along flat through the body maker, stopped at a station, and then two big wings, or we called them wings, they were forming molds, came down and clamped the can around the form you wanted it. Now, the advantage with this is you could make square cans, oblong cans, round cans, whatever shape you wanted. These originally designed body makers would do that.
When you started, Gord, were most of the lines wing form?
They were all wing form when I started. And again, I have to go back to a man named Carl Trumper who did a lot of work in going into what we call the closing fingers. And they were developed initially by a man that worked in Hamilton plant, and I can't recall his name. He moved to Simcoe, then he went from Simcoe to Vancouver. Then he left the employee as an employee of the company.
Gord, is there a difference between manufacturing the sanitary 401, 411 and, say, the gallon double-tight can there?
The manufacturing is basically the same, except on the gallon double-tight, we do have what we call ears on it, that a bail or a handle is applied so you can carry the can.
Well, Gord, when I was in Hamilton and we made that can before it was transferred to Simcoe, we used to punch a hole in the body of the can, and the ear was put through and soldered on. Now, they changed that method in Simcoe. What do they do now?
Well, we started out that way. We were soldering the ears on, and it was the can never looked good. There was solder on it. They would rust because of the flux, and they would come off. We would have problems occasionally with the ears pulling off. We went to a machine that the company developed, a clincher, and it's a 4-station die machine that actually picks up the ears automatically and puts them right on the body before it goes into the body maker.
They make a little indentation in the body for the ear to sit in?
There are 2 stations where you make indentations. The ear goes into the indentation, then 2 stations where it is clinched or hammered home at that point to make it a unitized package.
And then we made the double-tight rings in the Simcoe operation.
The double-tight rings and the plugs for this, the closure part.
And the bales.
The bales, they were made. The double-tight rings used 3 presses. The plugs or the closures used 2 presses. And that required, we had tool and die makers and very skillful ones. We went out, we shopped around when we were getting into a lot of these innovations. We hired people that had been in aircraft industry, farming industry. We tried to make sure we got 1 or 2 German people who had gone through very extensive training as an apprentice. And we used these people to help us develop them, along with a supervisor that came from Hamilton, Bill Hickey, who devoted a lot of his time just to make innovations and to make sure that this can was satisfactory for our customers.
At one time, Gordon, didn't we put the bales on by hand and then we went to an automatic installer on the bales?
Yes, and that was an outside development from Sweden. We bought the machinery to come in and do that.
My guest this morning is James Woolsey. Jim was our plant manager from 1962 to 1976. When you came into Simcoe, Simcoe was part of the eastern area, I believe. Is that true?
Yes, in those days, the American Can Company, which operates at both sides of the border, the whole continent, you might say, the continent was divided up into 3 divisions. The Eastern Division, the Central Division, and the Western Division. And the lines ran right across the border.
So Simcoe then became part of the Canadian division after they eliminated these sectional areas. We became part of the international, I believe, Jim.
That is right. The areas were eventually done, well, they were maintained in the States.
But the Canadian company was formed for various business reasons, sales-wise and other. And eventually the Canadian company became part of the rather large international operation of the American parent company, American Can.
I wonder, would you run over the operation at Simcoe? Like, what was your line levels and so forth? How many crews did you have?
We wound up with something in the order of about 17 can lines, I think. Maybe 16 or 17 can lines. And how busy we were was expressed in how many lines you ran. How many lines did you run on the first shift, the second shift, and the third shift? And we would reach a peak of 11, 11, and 8. That's 11 of those 16 or 17 lines running in the daytime, 11 in the afternoon shift, and 8 during the third shift, during the night shift.
We'd employ, I guess, about 500 people back then, Jim.
Actually, it would be over 600
Over
people.
600?
Yes.
That's great.
At the peak time now, in the summer months when we were going flat out with the 11, 11, and 8, it took about 630 to 50 people around.
So a lot of those people would be summer help we'd be bringing in from the high schools and colleges.
Yes, we contributed a great deal. The American Can Company contributed a great deal to the betterment of the younger people of Simcoe, who were able to work there during the summer and pay for their college training that they received later. I had many times in my experience as a manager with the Can Company, I had letters from people thanking me and asking me to thank the American Can Company for the help they received working in summer times in can plant.
You did these cans in the summertime for the tomato pack. You had to make them in July and August for the pack coming up in September. This must have caused you a lot of warehousing problems, Jim.
When I arrived in Simcoe, the numbers, and when I say numbers to a plant manager or any management of the management team, that means the economics. The economics added up in those days where labor was a very small portion of the total cost. It was a good idea to get the cheapest possible warehousing that you could get. And you could spend a fair amount of labor on moving the cans around. In Simcoe, there was a situation of the fairgrounds. It was good. It made good, solid good numbers to warehouse cans in the fairgrounds, even though knowing that you had to get completely out of that warehouse once a year for a period of 10 days for the annual fair, which has been going 137 years, and we couldn't stop that.
Very short-sighted of them, Jim.
Well, yeah. However, wages, inflation, and everything else came along, and wages started to go up here, and the cost of having the buildings and whatever stayed down here, and eventually it became more attractive from an economical standpoint and necessary if you're going to remain a viable operation. And everybody's interests are served by the company they are working for being viable. It became a better idea to have a central warehouse so you could put your product in there and not have to move it out every year. We got into an agreement, first of all, up not too far from the studio that we're sitting in now, in a warehouse, custom warehousing, you might call it, where we rented the warehouse space and we stored cans in there and waiting for the time in which they were needed. It became much more viable to have that type of an operation, and we've eventually moved out of the outside warehousing. At one time with the fairgrounds, we had cans in tobacco warehouses in Delhi and Aylmer, all heading to the tomato ground up in the the Heinz or the Libby's or those places.
Southwestern Ontario.
Or Campbell Soup. to southwestern Ontario tomato crop. But those places, all the labor cost all finally made our position untenable, and we did away with that and got into central warehousing. And this was furthered by a second central warehouse and closing of the first one and the opening of a much larger one on
Davis Street.
Yes, on Davis Street.
So you're really in a problem there, Jim, because you'd have the cans in the warehouse at the fairgrounds from January through to June or July, and then we'd have to move them up to Delhi. And then when the tobacco came in, you'd have to move them back down to the fairgrounds after the fair. So there was a tremendous amount of handling of those cans.
It was a costly thing, and as I said, labor by this time had cost more, and so did everything else.
Running the fleet, too, Jim.
Running a fleet of trucks back and forward. Trucks were more expensive than what they used to be before we had the inflationary cycle that we've been in for so many years.
We had our own fleet back in those days, Jim.
Our which?
We had our own fleet of trucks in those days.
Yes, we had 10 units on the road, mainly between Hamilton and Toronto, to service the Campbell Soup business.
The can plant was a noisy place to work, and yet to some it was a pleasant sound they will never forget. Before we talk to Gord Pangborn about income improvements, let's walk around the plant and see some of the people at work.
Nothing but the best. Oh, they are. I'll just sort of think I can talk it. Hey, Peter, what's happening on the Avalon line?
Got another one, John?
Oh, good.
Back in the early days of the American Can, getting hired was much easier if you participated in sports. The American Can fielded many fine teams in baseball, hockey, etc., and fine athletes were seldom turned away. Let's discuss sports with the Bentley boys and some other employees. Gord, I understand it helped a lot if you played sports back in those days to get into the American Can. Is that true?
Yes, it happened to be that the hockey players worked in the shipping and the ball players worked upstairs. And I know when I played for the Simcoe Young Men's Club, Frank Gelanis was a supervisor there, and he was also a member of the Simcoe Young Men's Club, and he helped us quite a bit. But it did pay to be a sportsman, you know.
Yeah, that was much the same as the Hamilton plant where I started. If you knew sport, played sports, you could get in without any trouble, even if it meant laying somebody else off.
Yeah, I'm afraid that.
Back in those days, I understand the American Can had quite a softball team. Gord, were you
Yeah,
familiar
well,
with that?
yes, they did have a pretty good softball team. Well, I think, did you play for it one year?
No.
Okay. I know Biff Cody played. He was a red-hot third baseman, I guess. Herb Hawes. Les Rondo.
Herb Champion.
Herb
Did
Champion.
Frank Brensley play on that?
Yes, I think he did. Yeah, he did.
Frank.
Weren't they city champions? Or?
They were.
Not just city.
Yeah, they were. Yeah.
They were all out there. They went out in Ontario Playhouse too, and I don't know whether they won the championship, but they went quite a ways in the Ontario Playhouse.
Wasn't the Norfolk Umpires Association formed with Canco people? Did they not
Les
start
Rondo,
this?
I believe, was the head of that.
Les Rondo, Frank Brenchley,
Biff Cody.
Jack Garrett, Doug Glover, and Biff Cody were all
And
founding members of
Frank Casey.
And Frank Casey, yeah, of the.
Oh, Frank was in there, wasn't
Oh,
he?
yeah.
Harold Dubois, was he?
He was in the minors, in the softball association, but he wasn't affiliated with the umpires.
Simcoe had a great representation on the OASA, the Ontario Amateur Softball Association. There was Herb Champion, Harold Dubois, Clarence Perkins, and in later years, Bill Martin, Fred Kent. They were all members of the OASA, and Clarence Perkins and Bill Martin, they served as presidents in the organization.
I think Clarence had the longest stay. I mean, he was
He did,
just
yeah.
about
He had
after
about-
retired from working, he's still with it, and I think till he deceased.
Baseball no-hitters. Is there any thinking there?
Yes, Bud Chandler worked at the American Can for years. Spud had at least 2 no-hitters in the Ontario Baseball League. Spud was a southpaw, left-handed pitcher, and he had quite a long career. He lasted a long time in the pitching business. And when he lost his fastball, he reverted back to his some pretty good curves, and he stayed in there a long time and had a very successful career. He's quite proud of that.
Just like old man River, he just kept rolling along.
He did, yeah.
We also had a fellow by the name of Doug King who worked in the shipping at the American Can, and later he worked at the Reformer, and he was probably the best pitcher ever around this area to come out of Simcoe, and he had a couple of no-hitters, and he was probably the best pitcher ever to come out of Simcoe.
Yeah.
Did Spud ever have a tryout with the major league team?
Not to my knowledge. I think he was over at Brantford and tried out with them.
I think Stratford, Intercounty.
Yeah, I thought he had mentioned to me once that he did have a tryout with one of the major league
Probably
teams.
did. I know.
And he didn't have the speed on his pitches.
I know Doug King did. He went to the Pittsburgh Pirates training camp. This is just after he left the American Can, and he was down in Bartlettville, Oklahoma, and he did quite a job down there for him. And I think they really wanted to sign him, but in those days the bonuses weren't like they are now. So I think that was one of the main stipulations that brought him back. Plus, he had a pretty good job at the Reformer.
I understand the American Can was deeply involved in hockey in the area. Jim, do you want to tell us something about that?
Yes, we were. There was one of our foremen, Frank Joannis. He was the coach of the Girling midget hockey team in Simcoe, which won the Ontario Championship in 1953. And then there was another championship won in that same year that Chirp could possibly tell you about.
Yes, that's right, Jim. Same year, same teams played, Collingwood and Simcoe, both in the midgets and the intermediates. And the intermediates in that, they were really a going concern, and the town and everybody just involved right in with them. A few players that worked off and on the American Can, Harold Schooley, Doug Walton, George Coulter, my brother Harry, and Herb Hoff was the manager, and I was the secretary and player procurement manager for the team. And we had a real exciting year, packed houses, and finally won the first championship in intermediate hockey for Simcoe. And we had a big midnight parade downtown with a band and fire trucks and a big social event at the Armories. I had some of the things didn't get over till 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, but it was quite a thing.
Did you fellas play any hockey on these teams?
I played several years before that, before the Gunners. That used to be called the Simcoe British Knitters, and I played a couple of years. But working shift work, it was pretty tough to get off, and so I just give it up. And also, I wasn't good enough. But that's not the point. The American Can had a commercial hockey team, and we could always seem to arrange to get one night traded, to play, where if you're playing intermediate, you were booked 3 or 4 nights of the week.
Would you like to comment on those golf tournaments?
We had a good golf team, and then we sent we got an invitation from Geneva, New York, and we sent a bunch of fellows over to play, and they cleaned house over there. They brought all the good prizes back, and I don't think Geneva appreciated it.
Probably never invited you back.
No, we never got an invitation back. You're very right.
I remember the early golf tournaments from Hamilton when we used to come up, and it was always a tie-in suit
Yeah,
affair.
it was
Jerry McVean, Bill Henderson would come up, and you'd play golf, and then everybody would have a shower. You'd all dress up, and you just weren't there if you had on a sweatshirt.
That's
so
right.
You weren't allowed really at the table. They were quite classy affairs back then. Any holes in one scored? Do you have any holes in one gourd?
Yes, Simcoe was quite fortunate. We had several golfers. Ben Mullins and myself both have 5 each. John McGee had 3. And I have 2 sons that worked at the American Can at that particular time. And my youngest son, Guy, had 1. And my other son, Jeff, who's a pro at Brantford, he had 3. He had 1 on a par 4 in Burlington at the American Can tournament there. And I might say it cost Dad a lot of money. But I think, if I remember correctly, Art Clark had 1. Ted Kay had 1. And Bill Wilson had 1.
Simcoe had some pretty fair golfers. Weren't they champions of the Norfolk Golf and Country Club? Ben Mullen, for example?
Yeah, we had John McGee, who was probably the oldest fella ever to win the Norfolk Golf and Country Club championship. And we had Ben Mullins, he won it 1 year. And we had Ted Kay. Ted won it 1 year.
Did Jack Wilgoose ever win?
I don't think so. I think he was runner-up several times years ago.
My guests today are Joyce Lane and Dorothy Hogg. Joyce ended up as storekeeper for the American Can in Simcoe plant, and Dorothy was in quality control.
The girls never went to the golf tournaments until one day we thought, well, why not? We would just go, and we enjoyed them, didn't we, Joyce?
Yes.
Yeah.
They always made us golf last.
Yeah, always.
Well, I think that was more because the head office girls would come over, and they just weren't the golfers that you girls were.
No.
No.
But we had quite a circuit going in that golf tournament. You know, there was Chatham, Toronto,
Really enjoyed
Hamilton, head office,
We went to the
Niagara
States
Falls,
a couple of times.
over to Fairport,
Yeah.
and Whitby. Even Montreal had one. I never went down to Montreal, but they had a tournament. But boy, they were sure a lot of fun.
I went to the Whitby one because we had a trailer down at Newcastle, so it was handy, and I went to that, and we had a very nice time.
Our guest today joined us in 1931, and her name is Daisy Arthur. And Daisy retired in 1972 after 41 years with the company. Daisy, you were tied up in the archery club. Was that an American Can club?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you know some of the names of some of the members?
Well, you know, I can't hardly remember all the members that there were. You know, but there was quite a few of them involved in it.
Did it last a long time, the archery club?
Quite a few years it did. And then we also had a rifle club. And I used to use H.F. Smith's rifle. I didn't have one, but I used his. I got to be a pretty good shot. And I lost the championship by 1X bull. Because I got overconfident.
You were a member of the bowling club, too. You used to do a lot of bowling.
I
remember,
the bowling
Daisy.
club, too, yes. And I had a bowling average of over 200. I was really good at that. We also had an archery club, too. And you see, the rifle club and the archery club was held in one of the big bins.
Employees of the pre-war period were generally low paid, had few benefits, and little or no job security. After the war, workers were no longer willing to accept these conditions, and companies like Simcoe began to unionize. Let's hear from 2 former union presidents, Jack Maxwell and Jay Hoover, about these interesting days. My guests today are Jack Maxwell and Jay Hoover. Jack was the man responsible for organization of Simcoe plant in 1956 and was the first president, and Jay was the last president of the CLC local. Jack, let me ask you, put you right on the spot. Why was the union formed?
Well, there was, I'll tell you, after the union came in, this here guy, the foreman in the shipping, he said to me, he told the fellow he was going to be laid off, and he'd been laid off many years at
at the fall, like October, November. So he told me, he said, they laid me off. Well, I said, I'll go see him. So I went and saw the foreman. And he said, yeah, I laid him off. Well, I said, well, you can't do that. I said, he's got more seniority. He said, he's used to getting laid off. He said, yeah. His answer to me was he was used to getting laid off. And so that's one of the things that brought it. And mostly due to who got in and who got out, you know. Like by that I mean is some of the friends could get in, and the guys that had been there in summers and couldn't get in, you know.
Some of the earlier interviewees were talking about the preference given to sports players. Is that true?
Yes, they all came through there. Well, it was started to organize in '53, not '56, and then official in '54. Was it?
Yeah, I think so.
You got all the papers, but. That was the first start, and when it started, there was two starts. There was a fellow out of Hamilton, out of Toronto. I don't know his name, but he was out of the what was that, AFNL?
Well, the Trades and Labor.
Trades and Labor.
George Downey?
No. Head of George. And this fella, he'd come once a week, and how are you doing? How are you doing? And Bill Brunton and I, we both got fired over the first organization. Like, now, we didn't get fired for writing somebody's name down. They saw me once writing a name down, and the foreman asked me what I was doing, and I told him it was just a piece of paper, but that was what it was for. And so the two of us, they let us both go.
How did you go about the organization, Jack? Was there a lot of trips to people's houses and so forth?
Not so much on my part. They'd started to organize it on the second time. I'd been discharged on the first try. So I didn't come in until, I don't know, they always kid you a little bit, but they needed another 70 names or something like that. So when I helped them, like we had another 95 or something. Right. So we went over the top. Good.
You go house to house, though, and visit? To get them to sign
I didn't so much because I was a night worker, you know, and but they did, yes. And when we went to the labor board, this here fellow that didn't give us no assistance at all when we were trying to organize the first time, he sat on the labor board, and they told us that people who'd get laid off there, that we couldn't use their cards. Oh, he said, yes, you can. Bring them all.
I imagine, Jack, when you formed the union, the relationship between management and the executive was a little more strained.
Well, yes, it was strained a little bit, like not so bad as it was the workers. They'd say to me, Mr. Donnelly was the plant superintendent. How was his wife this morning? And all kinds of stuff like that. You know, you got more. I got more from the workers than I got from the management. But management watched us very closely when we were first around.
Jay, you were the last president.
Yeah.
Who were some of the presidents in between you and Jack?
Well, after Jack was Don Newman, and then Don went on salary, and Ray Murray. I worked under Ray Murray as the chief steward, and then Doug West. Ray Murray went with the Canadian Labour Congress as a rep, and Doug West came as president, and I worked under him, and then Doug West decided to go with the Congress as well in the labor movement. So I took over the president's job and held that until the plant closed.
Yeah.
Jay, what happened to Doug West and Ray Murray? Didn't they move on in the union movement?
Yeah, Ray Murray went with the Canadian Labour Congress as a staff rep, and he's up in London now. He's still with them. And Doug West followed suit. He went with the Canadian Labour Congress as a staff rep. He's in this area. He services the Simcoe, Hamilton, Brantford Labour Councils. So they're still around, still going strong.
Good. When you were the president of the union, was there any threats or close work stoppage?
No, not. We had 3 or 4 people went out one day and sit outside the building, but it was no organized dispute or nothing like that. It was what's getting close to signing, and they just set out there.
They wanted the day off, did they?
But
Jay, were you involved in any work stoppages and close encounters?
Well, one that really, I guess the first one was a wildcat in which one of the foremans, we had a problem in a shipping department, and the steward went to try to check it out, and the foreman didn't really want to deal with it, and the steward was insistent that they deal with it, and they let him go. He told him, punch out and go home, don't come back, and the people followed him out the door, and it was resolved. It took a day to resolve it. It was resolved. Then the next one that was close was a bargaining session. We come down to the wire. In fact, our strike deadline was midnight, and about 11:45, we had a tentative settlement in Toronto, and we had to make phone calls back. And I understand some communication with it. Some of our people showed up on the picket line as to take over their duty and found out that we were working and had to go back home. And we did have one, though. I'm not going to say a legal one. Our last contract, we went down to the wire, and we didn't get a settlement, and the people went out. They were out for 3 days. We did get a settlement the next day after they had gone out. But because the settlement came after the strike started, you had to go through the ratification first. And so they weren't major skirmishes. They were things that seemed to go with 30, I don't know how many years with the union, 37 years, I guess, when the union was there. And that's a good record.
You used to negotiate with the head office, basically, Jay, and then at the end, the plant manager was doing the negotiations. Which way did you prefer?
Well, I found it. Well, they all had their advantages and disadvantages, I guess, because when you negotiate with head office, they could make the final decision right there at the bargaining table. However, they really didn't have a feel for what's happening in the plant. When we negotiated with plant managers and personnel directors at that time, they were very well aware of what was happening in the plants and our concerns, but they didn't have the final say. So you had to wait. They had to go back and get approval. So there was, like I say, plus and minuses in both. But we always ended up with a collective agreement. So.
Is there anything else you fellows would like to add to the union story?
Not for me.
Well, for me, again, Jack's here, and I never really got the opportunity to tell him, but I really appreciate what he, as a president of a local, did way back. As we look back in hindsight, we realize what people have done. And again, with you, Bob, having worked with you, I know you were not my boss, but working with management, you helped, and it made a good working place for people. We got good wages, good benefits, and I think most people left the plant, even though it closed, with a good feeling. In fact, I think most of us would be willing to go back and start up another plant if they were back here. So.
Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciated your efforts, Jay. As I said earlier, we rode on your coattails, and you paid the dues, and we got the benefits, and the salaried people really appreciate your efforts.
You're the only one that ever said that to me in my lifetime.
They weren't honest, Jack. The Can Company played an important role in the community life of Simcoe, not only contributing financially to the area, but developing community leaders and being involved in recreational activities. My guests today are Bill Wilson, the only homegrown plant manager in Simcoe history, and the mayor of Simcoe, Jim Earle. Jim, American Can must have had a major impact on the economy of Simcoe.
Well, there's no question about that, Bob. I think over the years that it has generated a tremendous impact in the local economy. I understand that at its peak, it generated into the local economy somewhere in the range of $20 to $25 million on an annual basis, and that would include wages, the payroll, and the various products that they would have to buy locally and so on. So I think when you generate through the economy and the multiplier effect that goes with that all the way through, it's pretty clear that the American Can was a mainstay of this community, and not only for the economic benefits, but the people who worked there, I think, were major contributors to the social life of the town of Simcoe, and I think that's important to remember as well.
You mentioned earlier some of the Can people who were involved in town affairs. you elucidate on that a bit, please?
Yeah, I think, Bob, my experience over the years is that a lot of people look at the American can as a payroll, and certainly that was important, as I indicated earlier. They also look at the product, and of course that's important in the overall economy too. But I've often thought that it's the people that really make an organization what it is. And there were certainly a lot of outstanding people who over the years worked at the American Can and involved themselves in community affairs on many different fronts. For example, if we take a look at the Simcoe Fire Department, we will realize that two of our former chiefs, well, our current chief came from the American Can, and one of our other longtime chiefs, Ty Culver, worked there for a number of years. We've also had people associated with the St. John's ambulance function, Doug Walker and Charlie Strange, who were very involved in that. And if we go back to in the history of the town with regard to the ballparks and the sports efforts that went on in the town, we think of people like Herb Champion, who was highly instrumental in developing the lighted ballpark down at Wellington Park years ago, just before the war, and the involvement with the various aspects of baseball and softball were Clarence Perkins and Jack Garrett. These are probably names that a lot of people today wouldn't remember, but at that time they were very important people in this community. Harold Du Bois is another one. Les Rundle, who was, I think, one of the top people at the American Can, was the founder of the Southern Counties Umpires Association, and he brought umpiring in this area to almost a professional level. So these are people who made a very large contribution to the life of the community. In recent years, we've established through the town a method of recognizing people who've contributed outstanding citizenship abilities, and some of those that have been recognized recently are Tommy Drayson and Bob Pope, who both were longtime employees at the American Can. If we look at curling and the Simcoe Curling Club, we'll realize that Jim Woolsey, who was a plant manager at the American Can for quite a number of years, was instrumental, I believe, in establishing the curling club, and has been very active in that over the years since. Town council, we've had representation from the American Can there as well. Roy Brookfield, again, you have to go back a few years on this, but Roy Brookfield, I always thought, was the socialist candidate, and after a few tries, he was successful in getting on council. I'm sure he had his impacts there, too.
Jim, you mustn't forget Diane Luke, who's married to your co-mayor, deputy mayor.
Right, yeah, well, Diane is an exceptionally fine person and a very capable individual. I'm sure that the American Can was very fortunate to have her, and I'm very fortunate that Charlie is married to her, because I think she imparts a lot of knowledge to Charlie himself, so that's probably a big help. But if we go across another aspect of the community, we look at Branch 79 of the Royal Canadian Legion, and that's a very important organization in this town. Again, we've had employees from the American Can, Jack Adair and Bob Pope, and more recently Don Allen, who have been presidents of that organization. And again, there's been a big contribution from that area. So we're really proud of not only what the American Can has accomplished in terms of the money they generated in this community, but the type of people that they attracted in terms of making a contribution to the overall community and making it a better place to live.
Yeah, Bill, would you give us some idea of why Simcoe is so successful?
Well, I think it's partly because we're a small town, and the people here were very dedicated people, and we had a really a lot of talent in Simcoe. I was fortunate even back when I was working in the Simcoe operation before I was transferred to head office that I had an opportunity to work in most of the plants across Canada for short periods of time on projects, and I was able to compare the dedication of the people, the knowledge, the skills that they had, and in most cases the other plants just didn't measure up. We look at the engineering group in Simcoe. I'm absolutely convinced that we had the best in Canada and maybe the best in North America. Our accounting group was second to none.
You're right, Bill.
I look at our manufacturing department, the supervision, mechanical supervision that we had, but basically the mechanics that we had were top-notch. And that goes for every department as we go down. The people that worked on the lines, the people that made sure that the correct cans went to the customers every day and met the schedule. You just look at Simcoe overall, and we had, I think, the best group in Canada.
Well, there's no doubt Simcoe paid the best wages in the area, Bill, and that enabled us to attract the best people.
That's it. That's
and you can just look at the seniority list and realize once they started, they stayed. And they learned their jobs well. Our quality was the highest in Canada. Certain customers would only have us make their cans, and it was tremendous people. And if Simcoe was successful, it's a real tribute to the Simcoe people.
Bob, again, going back to this issue of the quality people you had in that plant over the years, I think back to some of the contemporaries that I went to high school with, and as you stated earlier, the wage level there was very attractive, and everybody was fighting each other to try to get jobs at the American Can, especially students during the summer months to enable them to further their education. And I think of people like John Brookfield and Bob Blackwell, Wilf Hickman, Gord Pangborn, and Harry Phillips, all of whom were contemporaries of mine or close to it. And they've all gone on to be very successful people. I think probably one or two of them are retired now, but they made their mark in other fields as well. And I can't help but think that some of the training and the exposure to the things that went on in the American Can probably helped them a great deal, not only in their formal education aspirations, but also in the way they lived their lives otherwise. I think it's interesting to note that there are three other people, all in one family, who I believe started as students at the American Can, and for whatever reasons they were successful in staying on there in each case for 46 years, and I'm talking about George, Jim, and Gord Bentley. It's amazing that Jim was able to stay there for 46 years, but...
Amen.
That's right, yeah.
On the other hand, I think it's got to be a tribute to them as well as the whole situation related to the American Can that they were able to do that. So
well, that's very true, Jim. We kid Jim Bentley a lot, but he was a very valuable employee, as were Gordon Sherp.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. Good friends, too, I might add.
Was there any three-generation families that come to mind that worked there covered that period of time? Jim?
Yes, there is. There's Bazos, the Lyons, the Pangborns, the Vidlers, and there's a couple more.
The Weavers.
Yeah, the Weavers. The Weaver families, they were grandfather, father, and the Cormacs was another family.
Yeah, Cormac.
I think that about gets them all. But they, grandfather, father, and the son all worked there at different times. And
The American Can was born in 1905 and celebrated its 75th anniversary in 1980. Simcoe plant had a company picnic at St. William's Forestry Station, where everyone had a great time, as evidenced by these pictures. Do you recognize any of these faces? Hamilton, we had the annual picnics. We used to board the boat and go down to Port Dalhousie for an annual outing. Did they have such a thing here in Simcoe? Jim?
Yes, we did. At one time, it started out like you fellows as a fishing trip, and we'd rent a tugboat down at Port Dover, a fishing boat, and we'd go out and. But on the way back to the harbor the one year, a chap by the name of Pat Riley fell overboard and drowned just off the entrance to the Port Dover harbor, so that killed that. We switched into a safer environment. We had a picnic and a sports day where all the Canco people participated. I can always remember this one day we had our sports day. There was quite a rivalry between the shipping department and the manufacturing floor on a softball game. And I always remember Biff Cody being up to bat, and Biff took things quite serious, you know, and he's up to bat ready to swing, and somebody yells, "The bar's open." So everybody just ran right out of the field and left Biff standing there with a bat in his hand. I can always remember that. And they hear me yelling at everybody, "Hey, get back here. It's my turn to bat."
Gord, do you remember anything about the picnics?
Yeah, we used to have track and field, and it used to get pretty competitive. And they used to have the Canco Mountaineers there.
Yes, they played on
They played their
on a
country
flatbed
western
truck, yeah.
on a flatbed.
Were they made up of Canco employees, the
Oh,
Canco
yes.
Mountaineers?
All of them, yep. There was Bart and Roy Bizot, Alf Corral, Everett Dakin, and a lady on that team. Thompson was her name.
Nellie Thompson.
Nellie Thompson, yep. And they played at all our summer picnics, and they also played down at Ruth's Wayside Inn and just outside of Simcoe at that time.
Did they ever make the summer gardens?
No, they didn't play. They were more of a, like the Mountaineer name described them pretty good. They were kind of country western.
My favorite type of music.
Yeah. So we did have a big band in Simcoe, and we had several people that worked at the American Can that played in it. Nucky Hingley played the piano. Jack Wilkus played the drums. Harry Black played the trumpet, they're all employees of the Simcoe plant, and they could swing with the best of them.
Daisy, I wonder if we could swing into the fishing club and the Bart Bizot band and so forth. Do you have any memories of that?
We would get a big boat, the company would, and we would go fishing, go out for a trip on the lake. And you could fish if you wanted to, but we were moving all the time. But they had food on board, and we'd have something to eat, and then they had the band. And the American Can band would
So it'd be a dance
play
as well as
music
fish or whatever you wanted to do.
And we could dance whatever you wanted to do.
We are indeed fortunate to have located a movie film of a Canco fish fry shot in the early 1950s by Charlie Strange and loaned to us through the courtesy of Bob Rabbits. We hope this film brings back fond memories for some of our viewers. Since its beginning, Simcoe plant was blessed with many fine hourly and salaried employees. Each one in his or her own way contributed to the success of the company. Time, however, will only allow us to take a look at a few of these people, the men who were plant managers. We've asked Jim Woolsey to comment on these gentlemen. However, before we hear from Jim, let me tell you he himself was plant manager for 14 years, from 1962 to 1976, when Simcoe was the largest and most profitable plant in Canada, with satellites in Chatham and Toronto. In addition, Jim was also control plant manager for all of Eastern Canada. Over the years, Jim developed many outstanding hourly and salaried personnel and watched them rise to places of prominence in the Canadian company. On the wall of the conference room, Jim, we had a whole raft of pictures of the former plant managers of Simcoe, and I think we included everyone up to the present day. Would you have known, the first one was Ralph Pottle. Would you have known Ralph?
Yes, I knew Ralph Pottle. Niagara Falls, oddly enough, at one time was the head office of the Canadian company. When they first started in Canada, Niagara Falls was the head office.
Yeah, that's right. The can plant was down there, too.
And the can plant was down there, and that can plant was closed and turned into a machine shop.
And the business came to Simcoe.
The can business moved into Simcoe and formed the Simcoe plant. But Ralph Pottle was quite a flamboyant character. My best recollection of him was he was the fastest car driver I ever saw. He lived at Niagara Falls for quite some time because he worked for the can company in Canada before in Niagara Falls before Simcoe was opened. So when he was moved to the plant manager of Simcoe, he used to drive back and forth from Niagara Falls every day. And he never took any longer than an hour to drive either to or from.
And that was back in the days when they didn't have real fast cars.
And they didn't have very good highways.
That's true. I think Ralph was an American, if I remember, because when Sylvia Craigs went to get his picture, I think she had to go to New York to get it.
Yes, he was American, yes.
So after Ralph came Hal Smith.
Hal Smith was another American. Hal was a trainee and worked at Fairport near Rochester in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And he was moved up here to replace Ralph Pottle. Yes.
Then I met Hal in Hamilton when he was plant manager at Hamilton. Then I understand he came back to Simcoe.
He was back to Simcoe later on in his career, yes.
And he was in the head office as manager of Canadian Sanitary Food and then General Line Food. So Hal had quite a career with the company.
Hal was a very smart man and 100% gentleman. One of the real fine gentlemen I met in my life, not just in the American can.
I understand Hal knew the people of Simcoe plant by name. He could go into the plant and speak to any of them, and that's quite a tribute to a plant manager to be able to do that.
I would think he did. He used to come down to Niagara Falls plant occasionally, and I was up to Simcoe plant when I was in the machine shop end of the business. And we had very good relations, but only because Hal Smith was such a fine gentleman.
Yeah, he used to send us in the Hamilton plant when he was plant manager. He sent everybody in the salary a birthday card on their birthday. I always remember Hal for that. After Hal came Hib Donnelly. What do you remember about him?
Hib was a graduate of Queen's University, a very smart man, and contributed a great deal to the overall operation, I think, and development of Simcoe plant.
And after Hib, Hal came back, and then you came in to replace Hal.
Yeah.
And then after you retired, Jim, Jack Kalbeck took over.
Jack Kalbeck came from Vancouver originally. He started with the can company in Vancouver and was moved to Hamilton plant and then to Simcoe plant.
Yes, and then after Jack left, I think Sandy Tucker was plant manager.
Sandy Tucker had much the same. He came from Vancouver and he worked at Toronto's head office for a while and then was transferred to Simcoe plant.
And after Sandy, our plant manager was our only homespun plant manager in the history of Simcoe plant. Born and bred, come up through the ranks, our own Bill Wilson.
One of the smartest can-making people that I've seen.
Yeah, Bill was tops in quality because after he left plant manager, he went over to the head office with Jack Carlisle and Pat Henry, and he ran the quality operation for all of Canada and did a superb job.
Well,
Bill
Bill knew a good can, and he knew why a bad can was a bad can.
Yeah.
It was a very, and then we could fix it.
Well, that's
a very
true.
important man in the Simcoe history, Bill was.
After Bill left, the plant manager was Dick Patience. You didn't meet Dick. Dick came up from Canadian Canners in Burlington, and he was only with us a short time, and then he left. And then they asked, I had just retired in 1986, and they asked me to be plant manager for the 9 months till they replaced Dick. So I had the job for the 9 months. It was the nine most interesting months of my career. I really enjoyed it. It was a fine time. And then Gary Shearer came in. Gary was a Simcoe boy, and he went to Whitby. I think then he went as plant manager of Toronto, and then he came into Simcoe. And Gary was one of our own product. Mm-hmm. After Gary, I think Huey came back, Hugh Hutchings. Of course,
yes.
You developed Hugh.
Yeah.
You had a great deal of developing Huey.
Yeah.
And then when Hugh had his heart attack, Russ Brown took over. And Russ was acting plant manager for a while, and then Hugh came back, and when they closed the plant, Hugh was the final plant manager of Simcoe plant. The demise of Simcoe plant was a devastating blow to the community. It had served so well for so long. All of us who worked there during the later years knew its demise was inevitable. Over the final years, with most of the food business transferred to other plants, the gallon paint line was the essence of its being. However, when customers decided to convert to U.S.-sized containers, its fate was sealed. Certainly other factors contributed to the closure of Simcoe plant. We asked Bill Wilson, former plant manager, to comment on these. Bill, maybe you would talk to us about the closing. Why was Simcoe plant closed?
Well, actually, starting back in the period when Jim Woolsey was plant manager, the Department of Health and the various departments in the governments, both Canada and the United States, were looking into the effect of the soldering process of the can. From day one, cans were, the side seams were soldered, and they were looking to get away from this as a health hazard. Although our company had some of the top scientists in that field working for us, and they were able to show these departments that the lead content of the product was probably at the same level coming out of the fields due to the gasoline that we were using at the time with the leaded gasoline and so on, as it was after a period of time on the store shelf. However, the government mandated that all cans after a specified date must be non-soldered. And so that was a move that was costly for the company, for our competitors as well. And when they looked at the cost of the new technology and Simcoe being a multi-storied plant out of the marketplace, we brought everything into Simcoe from the Hamilton, Toronto area, and we shipped cans back basically to that area. And when you're shipping cans, you're basically shipping air, and it was very expensive. And the multi-story plant, again, didn't lend itself to the equipment, the new technology equipment, and so that, along with poor road access, high taxes in this area, and everything combined, the company made the decision to let Simcoe plant die. That's what they termed it.
I think the free trade probably affected it somewhat too.
It did. Actually, it did. At one point in time, we were supplying the beverage companies, and the volume that was required that year, we were unable to, in our Hamilton operation, to meet the demands, and we brought in fittings from the U.S. and actually paying the duty at that time and freight and so on, we were able to lay them down to our customer's plant cheaper than we could manufacture them in Simcoe.
Yeah,
And so
also
that is
the,
an indication of what it's all about.
yeah, the lifeblood really of the American can in the later years, Bill, as you will agree, was the gallon double tight.
That's
where
right.
we made our bread and butter. When the Ball Packaging sold that end of the business, that was the final nail in the coffin.
Well, there again, that was free trade because the paint industry in Canada decided they would go with the American gallon and the American quart, which is yet they haven't fully moved to. But when they made that decision, the American can, or Ball Packaging as it is now, and our competitor, they got together because the cost of tooling up for this again was prohibitive, and they decided that one company should take it on, and unfortunately the Ball Packaging sold out to Crown Cork and Seal. And again, that was the final blow to Simcoe plant, because that was one of the mainstays of the operation in Simcoe.
That's right.
The American can, or Ball Packaging, really manufactured 70 to 80% of all paint cans in Canada, and most of them come out of Simcoe plant.
Lord, I think it'd be most interesting to our viewers if you could tell us what happened to the equipment in Simcoe plant. If you'd be good enough to start at the assembly, go across line 1A through line 14, and tell us what happened to each of the line, then cover the press room and the two-piece and the packing.
Yes, I can go through that very easily. 1A, which was our 401-502 combination line, was sold to TML in Ajax. Lines 1 and 2 were scrapped. Lines 3 and 4, I'm pretty sure we scrapped 3 and 4. 5 we sold to Borden's in Ingersoll, who are now closed, and that equipment will be in an auction sale in July. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 are in the plant. They have been sold to some outfit in California, and there will be an auction sale on that equipment in July.
Gordon, I'm a little confused that they've been sold to an outfit in California,
Yeah.
and yet there's going to be an auction?
Well, what has happened there, he had a sale set up to sell them to manufacturer in East Germany who was going to refurbish the equipment and sell it to Russia and China. He could not get his money from these people, even though he's bought them from us. So the only way he can recoup, he has to go to an auction sale. And he will be bringing a lot of third world people into the auction sale.
So if they don't sell, he will be responsible.
He is responsible to get them out of the building. Whatever he does with them, that's up to him.
Is there a deadline on that, Gordon?
Not at the present time. There would be a deadline if the plant is sold.
Is there other lines you would like to cover there, Gordon?
Line 13 was sold to a manufacturer in South Carolina who makes gallon oblongs for the government armed services. Line 14 was sold to Korea.
When they bought these lines, Gordon, did they also take the palletizers?
Some did, some didn't. If the line was sold as a unit, packing equipment, press equipment, if available, was sold separately.
Okay, what happened to the two-piece pet food line?
Two-piece pet food line was sold to Mexico. Enchiladas, there is a company down there. They bought it as a standby unit for their much bigger two-piece equipment.
Okay, and the press room equipment, Gordon?
Press room equipment, the bulk of the press room equipment made trim for the paint cans, and it was sold to Crown Cork and Seal and shipped to Montreal.
The 3M unit was in there, Gordon. Has that been sold?
No, the 3M, the Malvina liner, Malvina dryer, and a few small presses are still remaining.
Okay, and what about the Yellow Brick Road?
Yellow Brick Road, that was dismantled. We sold some of it to American National. We refurbished a lot of it for Burlington plant in Bay d'Urf. So they have new packing department lineups.
Well, that covers the equipment pretty well, Gord. What about the plant itself? Has it been sold?
As far as I know, the plant has not been sold. I don't think there is any action lately. There has been a little. There have been a few suggestions what it could be used for, but I know it has not been sold now.
The Can Company was a wonderful corporate citizen, and over 62 years, several thousand employees entered its doors, many to spend their entire working lives, and others to pass on to various endeavors. Each one of us was left with a memory. What was yours? Some might say the financial impact on their lives or the social impact in the development of outstanding citizens. Others might remember the recreational activities, the support of local hospitals and charities, or the contribution to can-making technology. And they would all be right. However, in my humble opinion, the legacy of the American Can Company was its people, their dedication and loyalty, friendliness and humor, their ability to pull together in good times and bad. That's what Canco meant to many of us. Now let us close this program with these comments. What was the nicest memory you have of the American Can, Dorothy?
I think friendship is the nicest memories I have.
What about your nicest memory, Joyce?
Well, I enjoyed it all.
It made a good working place for people. We got good wages, good benefits, and I think most people left the plant, even though it closed, with a good feeling. In fact, I think most of us would be willing to go back and start up another plant if they were back here. So.
Let me ask you, Daisy, if you had it to do over again, would you do it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Without a moment's
I
hesitation.
wish I could start right in tomorrow.